The moment my neighbor finally cornered me by the rusted mailbox, her voice shaking as she asked, "Why do you keep avoiding me?" The words just tore out of me. Before I could stop them, I said, "Because looking at you hurts." The truth had been clawing at my chest for months, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any argument, heavier than the grief I'd been carrying alone since the night my life broke in half. She was standing there in the same yellow sweater, with the same tired kindness in her eyes, that my wife used to wear on Sunday mornings when the world still made sense. From that instant, the story rushed backward and forward all at once. It took me back to the years after I lost everything, quietly and without ceremony. Back to the mornings I woke up in a small rental house that smelled like dust and old paint. To the days I worked long shifts at a job that barely paid the bills, and to the nights when the house felt too big and too silent. Ordinary people don't fall apart in dramatic ways. They just learn how to carry pain while pretending to be fine. And that's what I was doing when she moved in next door. A woman from a different life, with a calm voice and a careful way of living. She volunteered at the community center and waved to everyone on the street. She reminded me of everything I had lost, without ever meaning to. At first, I told myself I was just being polite by keeping my distance. It was easier to nod and keep walking than to explain why her laugh made my chest ache, or why the sound of her car pulling into the driveway made my hands shake. But the truth is, grief doesn't respect fences or time. Every glimpse of her felt like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. She looked at me like a human being, not like a problem to be solved. And that kind of kindness can be unbearable when you're already broken. Then came the night. The storm hit without warning. Rain hammering the neighborhood, power lines swaying, sirens echoing in the distance. I heard a crash from her side of the yard and saw her porch light flicker and go dark. For a moment, I stood frozen in my doorway, telling myself it wasn't my place, that staying distant was safer. Pain thrives on proximity, right? But then I heard her call out, a small sound swallowed by the wind, and something deeper than fear pushed me forward. Dignity sometimes means showing up even when it hurts. I ran across the yard through the rain and found her trapped under a fallen beam from her porch. She was shaken and bleeding, but conscious. In that instant, the world narrowed to a single purpose. Compassion doesn't ask for permission. It simply demands action. As I helped her free, as we waited together in the dark for help to arrive, soaked and shivering, she told me about her own quiet losses, about a life that looked stable from the outside but felt empty on the inside. Moving next door had been her attempt to start over, to walk away from a world that measured worth in money and titles, instead of presence and care. As the hours stretched on and the storm passed, something unexpected formed between us. It wasn't romance, not salvation, but recognition. The understanding that pain doesn't belong to one person or one story, that resilience often just looks like simply staying. When the emergency crews finally came, nothing was magically fixed, but something essential had shifted. The bond formed under those extreme circumstances refused to fade. In the days that followed, we started to talk. Slowly, carefully, about boundaries and memories and the way loss reshapes a person. I told her about my wife, about the hospital room, about a promise I never got to keep, and she listened without trying to repair me. That's when I understood that avoiding her hadn't been protecting either of us. It had just been delaying the truth. Human connection isn't a betrayal of the past. It's a bridge to surviving the present. So standing there by the mailbox, with the air thick between us, I saw the hurt in her eyes when I finally said why I'd kept my distance. But I also saw respect. Honesty, even when painful, honors both people. She nodded quietly and said that sometimes the hardest thing is letting ourselves be seen when we're still hurting. In that moment, the ache didn't disappear, but it softened. The story was never about avoiding her. It was about learning how to live with loss without letting it define every future step. The pain of looking at her had been real, but so was the possibility of healing. The ending wasn't some dramatic transformation. It was something quieter and more enduring. The decision to stop running, to allow dignity and compassion to coexist with memory, to accept that sometimes the most powerful change happens, not when pain leaves, but when it no longer controls where you stand. That truth stayed with me long after the storm debris was cleared and the mailbox was straightened. The moment I chose honesty over avoidance, I reclaimed a piece of myself that grief had taken, and that kind of return is the one that lasts. The last part of the story didn't arrive with a grand declaration. It arrived quietly, over time, in small moments that rebuilt what grief had hollowed out. We stopped pretending that distance was strength. Instead, we learned how to be careful with each other, honoring what was lost without being trapped by it. We'd have conversations over the fence, slowly moving closer. We exchanged stories that weren't meant to impress, but simply to be understood. One evening, months later, as the streetlights flickered on, she handed me a photograph she'd found. It was an old picture of her, standing beside a man she had loved and lost. In her eyes, I saw the same unanswered questions I carried, the same exhaustion from surviving instead of living. And in that shared stillness, I realized the hurt I once ran from had transformed into something else. Not erased, not replaced, but integrated into who I was becoming. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means allowing memory to exist without drowning in it. The final truth settled gently in my chest as I walked back into my home that night, no longer feeling quite as empty, no longer afraid of the window that faced her house. I understood that some connections arrive not to rescue us, but to remind us that even after profound loss, dignity and compassion can still find a place to live, and that choosing to stop avoiding pain is sometimes the exact moment when life begins to feel possible again. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more reflections on life and healing.